Good morning, or, well, it is technically still morning, so I'm gonna stick with good morning. So, I thought that I was going to talk about a hot topic. Well, it's not really a hot topic either. It's something that if you're a programmer, you probably heard this, and if you're not a programmer, I should enlighten you to the rivalry that is Frontend versus backend, because there are actually people who are fighting. We fight about everything. So I mean, if we can fight over skin color, why not fight about what part of the code that you work on, and what's the trickier bit to work on? So let's first define frontend and backend. Let's start by that. So if you work mainly in a web-based interface environment, or like something of that nature, basically the client side of an application, you do most of your work with CSS, HTML, JavaScript, that sort of thing. Then per my definition, you are a front-end developer. Now, that means that most of your time is spent figuring out things such as user interactions and all that good stuff, and making sure that your page load times are good and all that great stuff. Okay, server side or backend developers. Now, if you are working mainly in a web server environment, in other words, you spend most of your days connecting to databases, creating data structures and endpoints, controllers, and controller endpoints, or controller action handlers, that sort of stuff. You do integration to other systems that communicate over HTTP or some other protocol, that sort of thing. You basically work with almost exclusively with the server part of things. Then you are a backend developer, per my definition. Right, so now these things are established, and the rivalry that exists between the two is usually that the front-end developers have really only become a thing in the past, say 5 or 10 years basically. And the server-side developers some of them, not all of them, but most of them at least from my experience, think of themselves as the real developers. And they do that because some of them, not most of them, have, engineering degrees, and the stuff that they have been doing is my favorite definition was from a person I spoke to a while ago. He said that the back-end developers are like the stuff that we work on is basically the engine of the application, or if you think of it in terms of a car, it's the engine, which is a fairly accurate description of what thing. Actually, it's a very good acronym, like not an acronym, but a description of the importance that is the backend. So for a few years, as you may notice, that today and that's actually why front-end developers are coming to become a thing. It's because the requirements and the standard of performance and interaction and so forth for interfaces is becoming higher and higher. Back in the day, 5-10 years ago, if you look at the older systems, you'll notice if you look at a modern product that is released by Facebook or Google, and then you look at, I don't know, some fairly outdated system, you can feel that there is a tangible difference in how well these things are. It may not be so obvious to us regular people, but if you are working with the government, if you work with like government systems or systems that have been around for maybe 10 years, you will know what I'm talking about. These systems were never ever designed with the user in mind, and that's where the front-end community, the front-end developers are coming into play, because you are, whether you like it or not, the trend is now going towards more user-focused interactions and trying to create nice applications that are very intuitive, because usually back in the day what usually happened was that you created a system that made sense from the engineer's perspective, and then you would simply hire people to educate your users if that was the goal, or you would simply release the system and let the users figure it out themselves. That was the way it used to be. Not so much anymore. So that front-end and JavaScript developers are fairly, they're very new in terms of being a part of the IT community. Now, where is the rivalry? Well, the rivalry comes because the backend developers, for the most part, consider themselves, as I said, to be the real engineers. And to a point that is true. It's very rare that I meet a front-end engineer who has a computer science degree or some type of background in the server-side languages. I actually argue, I do. Like, I started out as a Java developer, and I have studied computer science and so forth, and I will argue, and I think it's very important, like a lot of the front-end developers, they come from the design and UX, like most of them are self-taught. And there's nothing wrong with being self-taught, but it does show. It shows, because like ideally you want people who are programmers. I know it's a very unreasonable thing, and I hate the fact that that this industry is so crazy that, some companies are so I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word, it's so retarded. But because it is the dumbest thing ever. They treat you like they are asking basically that you know everything. They don't tell you that, but they basically do ask for almost unreasonable things. I mean, my backend developer colleagues are basically in a position where they need to know everything I know, and I need to know everything they know, which is great on paper, but it's not practical in reality. You should always strive for it, but it's very difficult. Anywho, so that's where that rivalry comes from. The design, like the front-end developers are basically being treated as second-class citizens, because the consensus is that the real engineers are on the back end. However, if you've been doing this for a while, you will realize that it's honestly, I stopped doing server-side and went into front-end because I honestly believe, unless you're doing something very specific, like something very technical, the front-end guys it is tougher. It's much tougher. The pace that things are moving at, you have to be up to date in a much more than you would ever have to on the server side. You will have to face challenges that are very, very tricky on a daily basis. These are things that are happening. I'm not saying that it's not happening on the server side, but I think it's a little bit unfair to compare things like that. To me, it's like comparing apples and oranges. There are challenges on both sides of this, and I'm pretty sure that if you want any proof, I can, like Ticketmaster here, for example, like the front-end code that they have was literally in such a horrible state that they had to bring in me to fix things. That was why I was hired, to come in and fix things. My colleague was also hired for this exact thing. They needed somebody to basically take full ownership of this. So if it's so easy to do these things, why did the backend guys fuck up the code? Because it's difficult. It is difficult. It's really difficult. I would even go as far as to say that it's much harder to maintain a really large JavaScript code base than it will ever be to maintain a really large Java code base or things of that nature. I'm not saying that one is better than the other or one is trickier than the other. I'm just saying that I think it's a little bit unfair. And now I'm going back to doing full stack work, so server side, here I come again. And so what I'm trying, I mentioned earlier that I talked to this guy who was saying that, well, the backend guys and the stuff that we do, that's basically, sorry. Okay, so in essence, what I'm trying to say is that that's my answer to this guy was saying that, we're working on the engine, and and he then went on by saying that, and the front end guys, they're basically the guys who put on the coat of paint on the car. And I say, yeah, okay, that's a fair analogy. The way that I think about it is that if the server-side guys are working on the engine of the car, the front-end guys are working on the body and the paint and the wheel and like basically everything that makes the car look like a car. If you put an engine on, if you put an engine in front of a customer and tell them this is a car, they're going to say, no, that's not a car, that's an engine. If you then put oh my god, it is so noisy here. It's insane. I don't know what's going on. Firemen are passing by. Sorry. So, once again, so if you put an engine in front of a customer and say this is a car, they're not going to agree with you. They are going to say, well, no, that's an engine. If you put a fully painted body of a car with wheels and everything like that in front of a customer and say this is a car, and they're going to say, yeah, but where's the engine? Do you see the difference? So my argument is that having this discussion between which is more important is so silly, because you need both to sell the product.